Dennis. Hello. My name is Makoto Kato from the Overseas Environmental Cooperation Center, Japan. I'm also a co-lead of Climate CCAC Cooling Hub. Today, I am talking about understanding the cost structure and applying a carbon market approach. Um, I think, as already mentioned, well, there are strong and growing interest on carbon markets, well, in addressing financial gaps in life cycle refrigerant management. But at the same time, we have received lots of questions and also concerns, worriedness about applying life cycle refrigerant management and carbon markets. So today, my talk is more focused on the refrigerants that are trapped in your air conditioner and refrigerators. Well, there are vast discussion about like a chemical byproducts, also stockpiles. But we have had a lot of unintended results in the early development of the carbon markets. So that we're not. I mean, I am not talking about the chemical byproducts or stockpile that are fit financially supplied of the by the carbon market. So I am only talking about the refrigerant management from an office air conditioner or like home air conditioner, etc., etc. And my talk is twofold. First of all, I am before going to carbon markets, I think it's very important to understand what the cost structure of life cycle refrigerant management. There are many people who are talking about finance, but what kind of finance and what kind of mixture or mixture of finance or co-financing are important. So I think depending on the nature of finance or the objective finances, I think it's very important to understand like a costs components or cost structure, which can be covered by different kinds of finance, including carbon finance. The second part, I'm going to talk about the basics about carbon credits. And I think what this is also connecting to the questions and also like response to the concerns that are coming from historical events. But I think about that nowadays, in 2026, there are lots of discussions, lots of improvements. I think it's very important to understand about that part. Then I would like to do my summary. So jumping onto the cost structure of life cycle refrigerant management. So many of you are already aware that for the life cycle refrigerant management, we recover refrigerants trapped in your air conditioner, your refrigerator, and that is brought to storage by transportation method means. And also like cylinders are actually used. And also then we are either recycling or reclaiming refrigerants for the second or the third use. And then finally, we are actually destroying refrigerants. So that's actually the end of life. To do this, we need for sort of like a hardware or equipment, and then without this kind of investment, it is very difficult. But at the same time, I think it's very naive idea that if we invest on this kind of hardware, we cannot still establish life cycle refrigerant management. So the second part is operational costs, OPEX, operating expenditure or OPEX. So in order to operate life cycle refrigerant management, we have somebody who are recovering refrigerants. This is the cost. And also for the transportation, we actually pay for transporters. And for the refrigerants reclamation, I think we need to actually do lots of tests and also like a chemical process or distillation process, and that is actually returned to the second market. Also, in the final stage, where we have to destroy refrigerant or in compliance with the environmental regulation, for example. And then in some cases, where we are also strengthening or ensure and traceability of this kind of actions. So this has never been paid by us in the past. This has been purely externality of our economy. But now, by having for in life cycle refrigerant management, especially in developing countries, this has been this is going to be actually part of our life, but still this is regarded our additional cost. So even if you paid on the hardware, we actually need to pay for service engineers or transportation business people or recycling business and also destruction. So that in summary, we have capex. This is initial expenditure, and OpEx as operational costs. And another expenditure. This is more about capacity building or training or costs necessary to achieve sufficient quality of LRM actions. And that there are various financing vehicles already exploited, so that the in some cases for the private sector investment cover everything, but again, well, this is externality, so that sometimes the capex has been supported by some bilateral and multilateral donors, or even MLF. Well, in the case of like equipment providing provision, and then also like a carbon credit revenue can support this. But at the same time, the main part for the carbon credits may be a very useful is to support for the costs for operating. So the fees collected from equipment users under PPP or EPR, well, these are in the long run, this can be established for under the regulatory regime. But for the time being, for the compliance, especially in developing countries, it's quite weak or non-existent. So that for the time being, well, as a transition intervention on carbon credit revenue may be helpful. So this is also the OPEX vs revenue balance. So if you look at the in the bottom, so the black crowds, well, this is something, well, you never work on life cycle refrigerant management. So you release your refrigerant well into the atmosphere. This is harmful. But at the same time, this is at this point of time, well, it's free of charge. At the same time, if you reclaim refrigerants or if you destroy refrigerants, actually you have different costs: recovery, transport, reclamation, and destruction. How can we balance all this costs? Then we have to actually get kind of like a service charge. So if for example, if we are supporting well, these activities well, with this service charge, well, we actually need to pay for recovery. We have to need to pay for transport, reclamation, destruction, and this comes from the pocket of, for example, equipment users or taxpayers. At this time, we do not have such thing for in most developing countries. So that the another idea is reclaimed refrigerant sales or expended producers' responsibility or polluter pays principle application. But these are also kind of like our goal in the long run. So that for the time being, well, carbon credits may be one of the options. Okay, then carbon credits. Well, I think you have already heard the nice presentation by Ali, so that I don't have to repeat everything. But the carbon pricing mechanism has been already very popular in many parts of the world. Carbon pricing, including carbon taxing and also carbon crediting and emissions trading for these kind of things. But these are actually one of key policy instruments that are exploited or that are introduced by many different countries, including for developing country governments. And then, well, you probably, for those who are new to carbon credits or carbon offsetting, well, you may wonder, this is not going to be reducing. Well, this is basically plus minus zero. So because for carbon credits coming from emissions reduction or removal, is actually offsetting for the others' emissions. So this is kind of like a offsetting plus minus zero. So this is a very traditional idea of carbon credits for carbon offsetting. So that the so I am going to skip. However, these days for like this is more about the contemporary carbon markets instrument principle. We rather actually apply conservative approach so that the it's more than emission. It's more than plus minus zero. It's we are actually reducing more than business as usual scenario, of course, but also like a reference emission is actually well the bottom line of our starting line to reduce emissions. And then a very conservatively calculated amount is actually credited, especially in this joint crediting mechanism. But then in other carbon crediting mechanisms, to some extent, well, this kind of like a conservative approach is applied. So in that case, we are not anymore applying one-to-one or plus minus zero, but it's more like more than the simply offsetting, well, as a transitional method. Then in future, we do not want to keep subsidizing for emissions reduction because well, we are actually looking at the net zero emissions. So that we basically think about well, like elevating the compliance level, elevating for the reference level, and finally, well, if well, this is done by 100% compliance, which is still challenging, but I think well, this kind of like a time frame is important. So I think it's very important to think about carbon credits and applied LRM, not only with this snapshot today. Well, we need to have look at the long time horizon and then step by step towards the net zero emission reduction. But at this time, we need to actually keep working on recovery and then also reclamation and destruction. Because for those people who are not paid, they should be paid for this service. And by so doing, we can actually get closer to the net zero emission gradually. So this is my end of my presentation. Thank you very much.